Welcome to my channel Sci-Fi Love Story. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Explosion came first. Then the silence, heavy and suffocating like the world itself had forgotten to breathe. Dust hung in the air, coating everything in a fine gray layer. Cale Rivers wiped his brow and stepped over the twisted remains of what had been a forward medical station. The building's walls were jagged and broken, like teeth gnawed by some unseen giant. Outside, the battlefield stretched endlessly, a shattered tapestry of scorched earth, mangled vehicles, and craters smoldering with residual heat. Cale's hands, steady despite the chaos, adjusted the straps on the field medkit slung over his shoulder. A low groan reached him from under a collapsed steel beam. Without hesitation, he dropped into the rubble, lifting what remained of the ceiling just enough to reach the soldier pinned beneath. "Can you move?" he asked, voice calm despite the pounding in his chest. The soldier's eyes opened, a flicker of pain and fear. "Yes, just a bit," she whispered, blood streaking her uniform. Plasma burns marred her skin, deep and cruel, glowing faintly in the dim light as if the wounds themselves refused to heal. Cale gritted his teeth and set to work. Every motion was precise, deliberate, almost surgical. He had done this 100 times under worse conditions. And yet, the weight of responsibility never lessened. The regenerator hummed to life, projecting its lattice of blue light across the wounds. Cale guided it with minute adjustments, watching as synthetic collagen wove through charred flesh. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. "Almost done. Hold still," he murmured. Another explosion rattled the debris around them, showering sparks and dust into the air. He ignored it. Looking up never helped. Nearby, Torin shouted over the din. "Rivers, we have more casualties. Grav munitions just landed 20 meters from the North Ridge." Cale's jaw tightened. Grav munitions, artillery shells that created miniature gravity wells on impact, were the latest gift of the Valeric fleet. Bones weren't broken so much as smashed, rearranged into grotesque puzzles that no human surgeon could solve without advanced tech. And the tech here, in the middle of a war-torn sector, was rudimentary at best. "Almost done," Cale replied, voice steady. His patient's pulse was weak but present. That was enough for now. Once the dermal layer set, he helped her to her feet. "Try not to get shot again for at least 24 hours, he said, a dry attempt at humor. She gave him a faint, bitter smile. He moved across the battlefield like a ghost of calm in a storm, dragging survivors into the craters and makeshift shelters. Each time he touched a wounded soldier, his hands remembered every lesson of medical school, every instinct honed over 3 years of unrelenting war. There was no pause, no hesitation. For Cale, it was simple: stop the bleeding, stabilize, survive. That's when he saw them, the Valeric aircraft. 3 sleek, organic-looking ships banked in from the distance, their propulsion systems whining at a pitch that made human ears ache. Cale froze, assessing. Attack formation. No, too slow. Reconnaissance. Possibly. One of the ships broke formation and descended toward the crater. The ramp extended like a tongue, kicking up dust as it settled. From the ramp emerged soldiers, clad in ceremonial white armor that gleamed even under the overcast sky. They didn't fire. They didn't rush. They stood, waiting, observing, calculating. Then she appeared. Blonde hair, pale skin, elongated ears, eyes that carried a weight impossible for a human to fathom. She walked with absolute confidence, a predator in a realm where everything else screamed panic. Cale felt an odd sensation, a ripple of recognition that he couldn't place. The battlefield around him seemed to pause. The human soldiers holding rifles lowered them slightly, confusion etched into every face. "I know those hands," she said, voice carrying across the crater. Every word sliced through the static noise of war like a scalpel. Cale's mind stuttered. "Excuse me," he asked, still kneeling next to a gravely wounded man. "I remember you," she continued, tilting her head, ears catching the light. "Threshold Station 9, 7 years ago." Memory slammed into Cale like plasma fire. He remembered the ruined station, ambushes, chaos, the stench of blood and dust. He had been a young medic then, barely out of training, thrown into a war he didn't fully understand. And there, amidst the ruin, he had seen her, wounded and dying, marked by the telltale ears of the Valeric. He had stopped, pulled out his kit, risked capture, risked death, and he had saved her. "You were bleeding," Kale said slowly. "I treated you because," he trailed off. Words failed. The years of war, the constant urgency, made this confrontation surreal. "You acted with care, with gentleness," she said. "Even when everything around you screamed destruction. I have never forgotten that." She introduced herself formally. Queen Commander Selivra, 3rd Fleet, House of Velar. 3 years of efficient, merciless war had been waged under her command. And now she was here, in the middle of an active battlefield, not to kill him, but because of him. Kale's first instinct was skepticism. "So, you're not going to kill me?" Selivra's eyes held something older, deliberate. "I am here because your hands reminded me that even in war, choices exist beyond destruction. You taught me that what is alive is worth preserving, even if it is the enemy." Kale blinked. I just treat people, that's what medics do." "No," she replied, the authority in her voice undeniable. "Most medics prioritize tactical efficiency. You did not. You treated life with consistency, regardless of rank or species. That principle is dangerous, because it cannot be defeated, only adopted or ignored, and I have chosen to adopt it." A low rumble announced the arrival of human reinforcements. Captain Tro's command transport banked overhead, weapons tracking the Valeric perimeter. Kale felt the tension spike. Weapons drawn, both sides braced for the inevitable escalation. "I am calling a temporary ceasefire," Selivra announced, her voice cutting across both human and Valeric lines. 72 hours, humanitarian operations only, neutral ground." Gasps and muttered protests erupted on both sides. Tro's lowered her visor, studying the situation. "Explain," she demanded. Selivra stepped forward. "This war has destroyed lives, resources, and reason. We kill over systems we cannot exploit alone. But your medic, this human, showed me mercy. His hands reminded me that there is another way. I offer this ceasefire to prove that remembering kindness can matter, even in war." Kale's pulse thudded in his ears. The battlefield, for a brief, miraculous moment, was silent, as if the universe itself was weighing the possibility of peace. Troz studied Kale, her expression unreadable. "Your opinion?" she asked. Kale looked at his hands, still bloody, still steady. "We have wounded who need treatment. And if an alien commander landed in a war zone because she remembers my hands, maybe that's worth exploring before we shoot at each other again." After tense minutes that felt like hours, Troz gave the order. Ceasefire. Neutral ground. Human and Valeric medics would work side by side. Wounded from both sides would receive care. For 72 hours the war paused, not because of strategy, but because of compassion. Kale spent the next hours treating the wounded, moving from bed to bed. He watched Valeric medics use technology that dwarfed his field equipment. Cellular regenerators that worked in minutes, neural repair systems that remapped crushed nerves in real time, pain suppressants that actually quelled the agony of plasma burns. And yet, he noticed Selivra watching him, almost as if studying the motion of his hands, the gentleness with which he approached each patient. On the second day of the ceasefire, Selivra led him aboard her command ship, a vessel of flowing, organic lines and soft, pervasive lighting. She showed him footage from Threshold Station 9, surveillance from the day he had saved her. Kale watched his younger self, panicked and exhausted, kneeling over her, hands steady as he applied bandages and stabilizers. "That determination," she said quietly, "is what haunted me. You acted not from calculation but from conviction, from a belief that preserving life matters more than tactical advantage. That is why I remember your hands." Kale's stomach twisted. He had never considered that simple acts, doing what was right, not what was convenient, could have consequences that echoed across years, across species. Selivra looked at him, her eyes holding a weight he could almost feel. When the 72 hours end, we will reassess. Perhaps we go back to war. Perhaps we choose differently, but remembering your hands changed me, and that may change everything. Kale stared out at the battlefield from the observation deck. The sun was setting, painting the craters in shades of orange and purple. Below, medics worked side by side. For 72 hours, destruction had paused. Healing mattered more than winning. And in the quiet, steady rhythm of tending wounds, Kale understood something profound. Even in war, one person's hands could change the course of history. The 72 hours began like a fragile dream. Across the crater that had once been a battlefield, the air was filled not with plasma fire or grav munitions, but with the low hum of generators, the quiet shuffling of medical personnel, and the occasional murmur of a Valeric or human soldier asking for water or pain relief or simply reassurance. Kale Rivers moved among them, hands steady, pulse steady, though his mind felt like a storm barely contained. He had never expected war to pause, not in his experience, not in any doctrine he had ever studied. Yet here it was, a ceasefire enforced by the memory of a single human act, 7 years past, that had planted a seed in the mind of a queen commander. Selivra watched him quietly, her presence constant like gravity itself. She didn't interfere, didn't give orders, only observed, learning from him in ways that words could not capture. Kale made his rounds, treating burns, stabilizing fractures, managing internal injuries with the best of human improvisation and the best of Valeric technology. He marveled at the advanced devices they had brought, cellular regenerators that knitted tissue in minutes, neural pathways restored before panic could fully set in, pain suppressors that removed agony without numbing the mind. And yet, despite all of it, he realized that technology alone could not heal. It required hands that remembered how to be gentle, how to value life in ways that machines could not replicate. He approached a young Valeric soldier, barely 50 by their reckoning, whose leg had been shattered in a grav field explosion. The boy's face was pale under silver hair, ears twitching nervously as Kale set to work. "We're going to get this fixed," Kale said, voice calm, tone rehearsed, though inside he felt the tension of knowing this recovery was fragile. Selivra stepped closer, watching every motion. "You treat him the same as a human," she said softly. "I treat anyone who's bleeding," Kale replied without looking up. "Rank doesn't matter, species doesn't matter, it's simple." "That simplicity is dangerous," Selivra whispered, "but it is also revolutionary." For 72 hours they worked. Human medics and Valeric medics side by side, learning each other's methods, correcting misunderstandings, bridging gaps in anatomy, language, and culture. The field became a strange laboratory of cooperation, where life mattered more than strategy, where principles replaced orders, and where the war paused for the sake of healing. During the second day, Kale found himself walking along the edge of the crater, taking a moment to breathe. Dust and smoke still hung in the air, remnants of the violence that had scarred the sector. Selivra joined him without invitation. "You're thinking about what happens when this ends," she said. Her voice was calm, but the weight behind it suggested questions that could change entire civilizations. "I don't think about much beyond the patient in front of me," Kale replied. "It's what I do. I can't fix the war. I can only fix the people in it." "And yet your actions fix more than wounds," she said. "They fix perspective. You've reminded me that strength does not lie in destruction alone." He shook his head, trying to deflect. "That's a lot to hang on one pair of hands. I just try to stop people from dying. Everything else is luck or accident." Selivra's gaze didn't waver. "Luck has little to do with it. Choice has everything to do with it. You chose to stop the bleeding, not because it was profitable or strategic, but because it was right. That choice echoes beyond you. It changes the way others see the world, even those trained to see it only in binary terms of victory and defeat." Kale didn't have a response. Words felt inadequate. He looked down at his hands still steady, still moving unconsciously, imagining wounds that were not there, fixing injuries that were hypothetical. The third day of the ceasefire brought news that shook the fragile bubble they had created. High command from both species had responded, predictably, bureaucratically, and yet cautiously curious. Both sides had requested immediate debriefs. Orders for ceasefire extension were pending, contingent on verification that the neutral medical operations were legitimate and not a ruse. Selivra gathered Kale in a quiet chamber aboard her command ship. "They want proof," she said, tapping a holographic display. "They want confirmation that you, human, are not a tactical weapon in disguise, that your hands and the morality behind them are genuine." Kale swallowed, "And if they don't believe it, then they may end the ceasefire," she said bluntly, "and the field below will become a graveyard again." For the first time in days, the weight of responsibility pressed on him. Not only the lives he could touch, but the lives he could not control, the policies he could not change, the inertia of war that no single medic could halt. Yet in that moment, he realized that the choice was still his: how to act, how to teach by example, how to insist that life mattered more than advantage. The verification process was grueling. Representatives from Human Command and Valeric Command came aboard Selivra's ship, scrutinizing every operation, every method, every interaction. Kale found himself demonstrating triage procedures, explaining prioritization by medical urgency rather than rank, showing how compassion guided his decisions more than doctrine. Valeric medics observed with rapt attention, learning not only the techniques but the intent. Human medics, skeptical at first, began to see the efficiency that empathy could produce. Fewer fatalities, faster recovery, less chaos, and, paradoxically, more strategic resilience. By the end of the 72 hours, the sector below had transformed. Craters no longer smelled of smoke and death, but carried faint traces of antiseptics and the low hum of regenerative technology. Soldiers from both sides walked, some awkwardly, others with renewed strength. Injuries that should have incapacitated for weeks or months were healing. For the first time in 3 years, human and Valeric soldiers recognized each other not only as enemies but as survivors. It was during the final inspection that Kale understood the full scope of what had happened. Selivra stood with him on the observation deck, overlooking the crater, now a neutral zone marked not by destruction, but by recovery. "They are watching you," she said. "High Command will see the results, not just the wounded but the behavior. They will have to reconsider what it means to engage with humans in war." Kale frowned. "So, my hands just changed military doctrine." Selivra's lips curved slightly. "Perhaps not doctrine, but perspective. They will have to acknowledge that humans are not predictable, not purely tactical, that morality, principle, and compassion are part of the equation. That makes you dangerous in ways your side may not fully comprehend." He shook his head, trying to laugh, but it came out as a dry cough. "I'm just a medic. I fix what's broken. I don't design strategy or teach lessons about morality." "And yet you do," Selivra said, eyes steady on him. "Without intending to, that is what makes you extraordinary." The sun set over the horizon, bathing the crater in shades of crimson and violet. Kale watched soldiers, human and Valeric, move among the tents and field beds, some laughing quietly, others helping each other with simple tasks. He realized that for 72 hours, war had been paused not by treaties, not by negotiation, but by the memory of human hands that chose to save rather than destroy. And then, as the final hours approached, he was called to the edge of the crater. A small group of Valeric officers approached, including the same scarred guard who had doubted Selivra's judgment. They stood formally, armor glinting, expressions unreadable. "You have changed something," the guard said, speaking through Selivra's translation protocol. "Not the war, not the orders, but something deeper. We will follow for now because your actions demand it, not because we understand it fully." Kale nodded. I don't know if I deserve that. He paused, looking at the crater, at the soldiers, at the hands that had never stopped moving. Did what I had to do. Celevra stepped beside him. And that is enough. Sometimes doing what is right, without calculation, without expectation, is more powerful than any fleet, any weapon, or any strategy. Remember that, Kale Rivers. It is not the hands that wield the sword that are remembered. It is the hands that choose to heal. The final moments of the ceasefire were quiet. Orders from high command arrived, cautiously extending the pause, pending further review. For the first time, both species considered the value of restraint, of preservation, of cooperation. Kale returned to his patients, working tirelessly, though fatigue pulled at him like a tide he could not resist. He treated every wound, every burn, every fracture, the same way he had on that fateful day 7 years ago. When the sun finally disappeared below the horizon, leaving only the soft glow of artificial lights, Kale stood in the center of the crater. The humans around him were weary but alive. The Valerics were cautious but stable, and somewhere beneath layers of armor, skepticism, and training, understanding had taken root. Celevra joined him, her presence quiet but undeniable. 7 years, she said softly, and your hands are still the measure by which I judge choice. Kale looked at his hands, still steady, still capable, still human. I guess they are, but I never thought of them that way. I just do what I can. That is exactly why they matter, Celevra said. Because you do not consider power only life. That is rare. That is dangerous. That is why we remember. The stars above the threshold system shone brightly, indifferent to the wars below, yet for the first time in decades, humans and Valerics shared a quiet moment of peace. The battlefield would not be silent forever, and the war might return, but one truth had been etched into the fabric of this sector. Healing matters more than winning. Compassion is stronger than efficiency, and a single pair of hands can change the course of history. Kale Rivers exhaled, fatigue and relief mingling in his chest. He looked around at the crater, at the soldiers, at Celevra, and realized that even amidst war, there was room for humanity. And in that moment, he knew he would keep moving, keep tending, keep remembering that even when the universe demanded violence, the choice to preserve life could shape the future. Because sometimes, the strongest weapon in the galaxy is a human hand that chooses to heal.